Close your eyes and imagine you're standing in a wheat field in southern Iraq 5,000 years ago. The sun beats down mercilessly. Around you, thousands of people you've never met toil in perfectly straight rows, their backs bent under the weight of endless labor. Guards watch from mud brick towers. Your daily ration, measured in a crude clay bowl, waits at sunset. You cannot leave. The city walls that protect you also imprison you. Now step back 10,000 years earlier. You're in the same landscape, but it's unrecognizable. No walls, no fields, no masters. You move freely with your band of 30 souls, following the reins and the herds. You answer to no king. You store no wealth. You fight no wars of conquest. You are healthy, tall, and free in ways your farming descendants will never know again. What happened? How did we transform from the freest species on Earth into builders of our own cages? Today, using advanced AI technology, we'll reconstruct the greatest revolution in human history. The moment we stopped moving and started building civilization. This is the story of humanity's most radical transformation. This is the day everything changed. Welcome to the birth of civilization. Welcome to Chronicles Reborn. For 300,000 years, 97% of our entire existence as a species, humans lived without cities, without kings, without permanent homes. This wasn't primitive survival. This was a sophisticated adaptation that worked brilliantly. The bones tell us something remarkable. These people were healthier than their farming descendants would be for the next 10,000 years. Skeletons from the Upper Paleolithic reveal men and women standing as tall as modern Europeans, heights agricultural populations wouldn't reach again until the 20th century. Their bones were dense, strong, showing none of the repetitive stress injuries that would plague farmers grinding grain for hours every day. These weren't desperate scavengers on the edge of starvation. They were apex predators perfectly adapted to their environment. A single band of 30 to 40 people claimed hundreds of square miles of territory. They moved with the seasons, following game migrations, tracking ripening plants, relocating as resources shifted across the landscape. But here's what made this system revolutionary. They couldn't accumulate wealth. Without methods to preserve meat or grain for months, storage was impossible. You killed a gazelle, you shared it, you consumed it, it was gone. This biological constraint created an unexpected political outcome, radical equality. In a world where you can't hoard resources, you can't buy power. Dominance hierarchies that plague other primates were actively resisted. If someone tried to boss others around, the response was simple and devastating. The group left. In a world without borders or fixed property, freedom was measured in the ability to walk away. For 300,000 years, this pattern held. Human populations remained low, constrained by what the wild environment could sustainably provide. We were predators that fit within the existing food web rather than destroying it. Then the ice began to melt, and everything changed forever. Around 12,000 years ago, the planet entered what geologists call the Holocene epoch. After thousands of years of ice age instability, temperatures stabilized, ice sheets retreated. And in one specific region, this climate shift created conditions humanity had never experienced before. Sustained, reliable abundance. This is the Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern Iraq, Syria, and down into the Jordan Valley. Using AI technology, we've reconstructed what this landscape looked like when the ice melted. Wild wheat and barley grow in dense stands across these hillsides, not planted, just naturally occurring. Herds of gazelle migrate through these valleys in numbers that darken the horizon. For the foraging bands living here, the math of survival fundamentally changed. For the first time in human history, the calories you could harvest vastly exceeded the energy you spent finding them. It was here that a culture called the Natufians made a decision that would echo across 10,000 years. They stopped moving. We've reconstructed their villages based on archaeological evidence. Look at these circular stone houses with foundations weighing tons. See these massive grinding stones, hundreds of pounds of carved basalt, permanent, immovable. These aren't the possessions of nomads. These are the anchors of people who've claimed this land as theirs forever. For generations, archaeologists believed agriculture caused people to settle, that humans learned to farm and then built villages. The Natufians proved the opposite.
They settled first, living entirely on wild resources. They became the world's first sedentary hunter-gatherers. And with permanent settlement came something humanity had never developed before, the concept of inheritance. Watch as Natufian families bury their dead beneath the floors of their own homes. This isn't just disposal of bodies. This is a profound psychological shift. Land is no longer just a place you pass through. It's a place tied to your ancestors, to memory, to obligation. The earth itself becomes property. Then, biology triggered a chain reaction that couldn't be stopped. The population trap. In a mobile hunter-gatherer band, a mother can only carry one infant while traveling. Births naturally space themselves 4 to 5 years apart. But in a settled village, that biological constraint vanishes. Natufian women began bearing children every 2 years. Population exploded. Small bands of 40 people became villages of 200. Then 400, and with this growth came an invisible pressure building like a spring being compressed. The wild abundance that made settlement possible, those dense stands of wheat, those migrating gazelle herds, were being consumed faster than they could regenerate. The Natufians were caught in a trap of their own making. They'd grown too numerous to return to their old mobile life, but the environment couldn't sustain this many sedentary people. And then nature delivered the final blow. Around 10,800 BCE, the climate system collapsed. We call it the Younger Dryas event, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. Watch this AI reconstruction as the landscape transforms. Forests retreat, grasslands thin, the reliable rains fail. The wild food sources that supported these villages began to disappear. The Natufians faced an impossible choice. Option 1. Abandon their villages, break apart their communities, and return to mobile foraging. But the environment could no longer support this many people as hunter-gatherers. Choosing this path meant choosing who would starve. Option 2. Intervene. Control what nature would no longer provide. They chose intervention. And in that choice, they created agriculture, and doomed themselves to 10,000 years of harder labor, worse health, and political subjugation. Agriculture wasn't invented from ambition or curiosity. It was born from desperation. It was a survival strategy adopted by people trapped between starvation and the graves of their ancestors. Here's the brutal irony. Farming made life worse for almost everyone who did it. Look at these skeletons from early agricultural communities in the Near East. Average height dropped by several inches. These aren't just numbers. This is biological stress visible in bones. Their spines show compression fractures. Their joints reveal arthritis from repetitive labor. Women who spent hours kneeling at grinding stones developed chronic damage to their feet and lower backs. The diet tells an even darker story. Hunter-gatherers ate hundreds of different plants and animals, a nutritional diversity that provided complete protein, vitamins, and minerals. Early farmers? Their diet collapsed into starchy monoculture: wheat, wheat, and more wheat. But here's why agriculture spread despite making life worse. It produced more calories per acre of land. A wheat field could support 10 times the population of wild grassland. Individual farmers might be shorter, sicker, and die younger, but they had more children who survived to adulthood. Evolution doesn't care about health. It cares about reproduction. And farming, for all its misery, was reproductively successful. Then came the diseases. In mobile bands, pathogens couldn't establish permanent residence, but agricultural villages? Dense populations living in close quarters with newly domesticated animals created perfect conditions for epidemics to emerge. Shared water sources, no sewage systems, pigs and goats living among humans. This is where influenza, tuberculosis, and smallpox found their opportunity. The diseases that would kill hundreds of millions across history were born here, in these crowded farming villages. Yet despite shorter lives and chronic illness, farming continued to spread. Because it solved one problem: it fed more mouths. And those mouths grew into hands that cleared more fields, planted more grain, and trapped more people in the cycle. The agricultural revolution wasn't a triumph, it was a trap, and humanity walked into it with eyes wide open, because the alternative was starvation. The birth of violence. For 300,000 years, human conflict followed a simple pattern. If you disagreed with someone, you walked away. Vast, open landscapes gave everyone the ultimate freedom: distance. Farming destroyed that freedom. Imagine, you've spent 6 months clearing land, planting seeds, tending crops. Your survival for the next year depends entirely on that one field. Now someone threatens to take it. In the old world, you could leave. But leaving now means abandoning months of invested labor and condemning your family to starvation. You can't leave, so you fight. This is Jericho, around 8000 BCE. Using archaeological evidence, we've reconstructed what may be humanity's first true fortification. A massive stone wall, 10 feet thick, a tower nearly 30 feet high, visible for miles. For decades, archaeologists debated its purpose. Flood control? Ritual monument? Today, the answer seems obvious. It protected stored grain. For the first time in human history, wealth could be accumulated. And where wealth concentrates, theft follows. That grain storage facility wasn't just economic infrastructure, it was a target. Agriculture didn't just produce food, it produced something worth stealing. And theft produced the need for walls, guards, and organized violence. Raiding replaced wandering. Territory became worth dying for. For 300,000 years, humans had been the most geographically mobile large mammal on Earth. Now, we were tied to specific patches of dirt, willing to kill and die to keep them. This transformation required something new: coordination at scale.
The rise of hierarchy visual cue. A reconstruction showing leaders emerging, elaborate burials appearing. Building Jericho's walls required hundreds of workers moving thousands of tons of stone. Managing grain stores required tracking contributions and distributions across hundreds of families. Organizing defense required command structures and obedience. This couldn't happen through informal consensus. Someone had to plan, someone had to give orders, and crucially, someone had to enforce consequences for those who refused. The egalitarian structure of mobile societies crumbled. Certain individuals gained influence through controlling resources, organizing labor, or managing protection. For the first time in 300,000 years, some humans had power over others, and that power became permanent. The dead tell this story. Look at these burial sites we've reconstructed from the archaeological record. Most graves remain simple: a body, perhaps a bowl, nothing more. But scattered among them, a few graves explode with wealth. Obsidian blades carried from Anatolia, hundreds of miles away. Turquoise from the Sinai. Mediterranean shells, exotic materials that required long-distance trade networks and enormous resources to acquire. Status had entered the grave. Inequality was no longer temporary, no longer just, this person is a better hunter today. It was becoming structural, hereditary, permanent. For the first time in human history, some people were born into privilege and others were born into subjugation. This wasn't a moral failing. It was an inevitable consequence of the agricultural trap, and it was about to get much, much worse. Mesopotamia, the ultimate gamble visual cue. AI reconstruction of early Mesopotamia, canals being dug, irrigation systems emerging. Around 5000 BCE, descendants of these early farmers faced a new challenge. Population pressure pushed them beyond the rain-fed hills into the vast river plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. This land would become Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization. In its natural state, this landscape was hostile to human life. Rainfall was scarce. Summer temperatures exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The rivers themselves were violent and unpredictable, capable of sudden floods that erased entire settlements overnight. But beneath these hazards lay extraordinary potential. Thousands of years of flooding had deposited the most fertile soil on Earth. If, and this is a massive if, you could control the water. Watch this reconstruction of early irrigation systems. Canals had to be cut across miles of terrain. Silt had to be cleared every season. Embankments had to be raised and maintained constantly. This wasn't something a single family could do. It wasn't even something a village could do. It required coordination on a scale humanity had never attempted. Thousands of people had to work together, following a plan, accepting direction, sacrificing individual autonomy for collective survival. And here's where the final piece of the civilizational trap snapped shut. Those who controlled the water controlled survival itself. Uruk, the first city visual cue. A reconstruction of Uruk at its height. 50,000 people, massive walls, temple complex. By 3800 BCE, something unprecedented emerged from the Mesopotamian plains. The city of Uruk. Let me give you scale. 50,000 people lived within 6 square miles of walls. For a species that evolved to live in bands of 30, this was biologically insane. Every day, you walked among thousands of strangers. Personal relationships couldn't govern society anymore. You needed something else. You needed institutions. Watch this reconstruction of Uruk's temple complex. This isn't just a religious building, it's an economic command center. The temple controlled the fields, the canals, the herds, the grain stores. Most people in Uruk didn't own their own food supply. They worked on institutional land and received rations in return. Look at these artifacts we've reconstructed. Millions of crude clay bowls called beveled rim bowls. They're identical, mass-produced, disposable. Each one held a standardized daily ration of grain. These bowls represent the death of independence. You don't make your own food anymore. You don't control your own labor. You work where the institution directs. You eat what the institution provides. And if you displease the institution, you starve. The city walls offered protection from raiders, but they also enforced a new kind of captivity. Leaving the city meant leaving access to food itself. The agricultural trap had evolved into the urban cage. And just when you think it can't get more controlling, writing was invented.
The earliest writing in human history contains no poetry, no myths, no love letters. The first words ever recorded were these: inventories, tax assessments, wage calculations, barley, sheep, units of labor. Writing began as accounting, as control. Before writing, administration relied on memory and trust. With writing, every transaction could be recorded, every obligation fixed in clay. The scribe emerged as a new kind of power, not a ruler, but the gatekeeper of information. Those who could read and write controlled the flow of resources. Literacy became power. And power ensured that literacy remained restricted to a tiny elite. This was the final evolution of the agricultural trap. Your obligations to the state were now permanent, documented, inescapable. The city had developed a memory beyond any human mind, and with that memory came perfect control. The empire. By 2300 BCE, the city-state was no longer enough. If one ruler could dominate a city, the next question was inevitable: how many cities could be ruled at once? In the city of Akkad, a man named Sargon refused the traditional limits of kingship. Through conquest, administration, and overwhelming force, he unified the entire Mesopotamian plain under a single authority. He created something humanity had never seen: an empire. Millions of people, dozens of cities, hundreds of thousands of square miles, all answering to one man. This is where the agricultural trap reached its final form. From mobile bands of 30 free people to an empire of millions under absolute control, all in just 10,000 years, a geological instant. We started as the freest species on Earth. We ended as builders of cages so sophisticated we call them civilizations. The world we live in today is the direct continuation of choices made 10,000 years ago. The concentration of power, the strain on resources, the vulnerability to disease, the constant negotiation between security and freedom. Civilization was a trade-off. We gained the ability to preserve knowledge, coordinate millions, and reshape landscapes. We built art, science, and technology, but we paid a price. We traded freedom for security, health for population growth, autonomy for coordination. The question we must ask ourselves is this: was it worth it? If you enjoyed this reconstruction of humanity's greatest transformation, let us know. Which ancient civilization should we explore next? Subscribe to Chronicles Reborn to witness history brought back to life.